Here's the whole thing. It's too easy to only focus on the resources. The economy sends its capital there, the state lives off the easy money, and the rest of the country shrinks until it's too small to be worth caring about. The rest in Equatorial Guinea is the 3/4 of the country that lives under the poverty line, while 78% of the economy is made of oil that only generates 4% of the jobs. The government seems to have stopped caring as only 3% of the budget goes to education and health, while $1 million of Michael Jackson statues were sized in the American mansion of the vice president. He even had the original Thriller red jacket and one of the 2 diamond gloves. Their neighbor, Cameroon, has 1/10 of the wealth but 3 times less poverty. The consensus is that the Equatorial Guinean population would be richer without the oil, and that the country became what economists call a rentier state. Out of all of the forms the resource curse can manifest, Equatorial Guinea showcases the case of a state that stopped caring about its people. If you watch this video from anywhere in the West, you might be biased when thinking about those kinds of states. We are taught that governments are either democratic or stolen democracy, but today's consensus is that states are better defined by how big what is called the winning coalition is. A democracy lets a majority of the citizens be in that coalition, and thus the interest of decision makers aligns with that of the people. But if the winning coalition is small, like for the oligarchs in Russia, the nobility in medieval Europe, or the oil rentiers in Africa, then the people are left behind. It's easy to argue that this is a better way of seeing things. The democracy or not lens would put the governments of Saudi Arabia and North Korea in the same category. Having resources to exploit lets you shrink the winning coalition, and the smaller it is, the easiest it is to buy and to move, meaning corruption and political instability. 2 things we find for those reasons in Venezuela. It holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, and it's the clearest case of the curse rotting institutions that actually existed, which helps argue that resources are an actively deteriorating agent. Venezuela was a real democracy since 1958, the most stable in South America for decades. Powers were separated, parties alternating, and elections fair, but that democracy was built on oil rent, as the state had been funded by crude oil since the 20s, before it was even democratic. No matter how good the institutions could have been, the country was dependent on oil money, and so when the prices crashed in the 80s, political instability led to the winning coalition getting smaller and smaller, because the country, thanks to its oil rent, could do without that big of a coalition and so simply cut its lower levels when needed. And as the situation got worse, more were cut. Every time the coalition got smaller, the incentives shifted for the government and got closer and closer to blind self-preservation. From 2013 to 2020, the economy of the country got divided by 8 while in peacetime. For 2019, inflation is estimated at around 350,000%, and the monthly minimum wage was about the price of a Happy Meal. 1/4 of the Venezuelans ended up leaving the country. Venezuela showcases the case of a country that had a chance to escape the curse but didn't. This proves that the curse can indirectly destroy the economy throughout political deterioration, but it can also do so directly. At the beginning of the 16th century, when Europe realized the absurd quantity of gold and silver that was found in the American Spanish colonies, the reaction was either admiration or terror. Nobody realized that it would lead to Spain being impoverished for the centuries to come. At peak, one single of their mines produced nearly 60% of the silver in the world. What happened is that there was just so much money in the country that the cost of producing things often became way higher than that of buying it from abroad, and so over a century, both production and agriculture hollowed out so much that Spain relied on Northern Europe even for basic goods. What we have here is the case where the economy focused on the resource and stopped caring for the rest, which shrunk. And then there's this general idea that there is this inherent characteristic of Western countries that make it so it can't happen there. That those situations, which might sometimes seem absurd, are only the matter of third world African and Latin countries. And I think that Spain works well to discredit that feeling. What happened to Spain has a name that comes from a country where the same happened centuries after. It's called the Dutch disease, where a resource windfall makes your currency so strong that virtually every other export dies. So you end up with one industry and a hollowed out rest. The following happened to the Netherlands from the beginning of the 60s to around the end of the 70s. Industry's share of GDP went from 25% to a mere 15%. Industrial employment went down about 25%, and unemployment rose from 1.1 to 5.1%. The cause that's often attributed is the discovery of the Groningen gas field, which was, at the time, the biggest in the world. But then, unlike every other case we went through, they ended up diagnosing the disease themselves and reversed it. They did so partly throughout the Wassenaar Agreement. The thing was that the wages of the workers were indexed on inflation, which worsened it. So the workers accepted better work conditions and lower hours in exchange of lower wages. Then they stopped spending the benefits from gas in the annual budget as it was actively participating to the devaluation of the currency. The Netherlands is the state where the winning coalition was big enough that when the curse hit, the government both had the incentive to recognize it and the power to fix it. Yet the Netherlands suffered from it too, but there is one country that managed to prevent it, and it's Norway with their oil in the North Sea. Norway treated the money as inheritance early and so walled it off from politics before politics could organize around it. They now have a sovereign fund that has more than $400,000 per Norwegian and owns more than 1.5% of all listed companies' share in the world. Unlike the Dutch, they explicitly kept the investment aboard not to devalue their currency. But all of those mechanisms might simply be wrong. There is a strong argument in the literature for the curse being one of dependence rather than abundance, meaning that we blame resources for making economies dependent. But maybe that they are dependent not because resources are this phenomenon that it's everything, but because they were poor in the first place. And the argument seems supported by the fact that the countries that were already rich didn't get much poorer, nor did they get dependent. The answer is that it's not a single one, it's a matter of institutions. If abundance made you poor, then how do you explain Norway? And if being poor led you to dependence, how do you explain Botswana? The southern African country was one of the poorest before the biggest diamond deposits on Earth were discovered there in 1967. Before that, the country had in total 12 kilometers of paved roads and around 22 university graduates. There was no meaningful industry, and the country was landlocked and mostly desert. Then the country knew an average of 9% GDP growth for 40 years, going from $70 of GDP per capita to roughly 7 to 18,000 now, especially thanks to the Tswana consultative institutions, where leaders had to answer to the community. The counter-argument would imply that the weaker an economy is, the more dependent it gets, and yet one of the weakest starting economies produced the greatest positive outcome. And if the curse was as simple as making countries poor, then we wouldn't have seen a tenth of that economic growth. Botswana is what lets us say that resources reveal more than they create. They ask the question, is the society solid enough, healthy enough, for people to still be needed? And by that, I mean needed enough that the winning coalition cannot retract under the blanket of cheap abundance. There is one question worth ending on. Every democracy you've ever known runs on needing you. So ask it of your own country. The day it no longer needs your labor or your taxes or your bodies, what would guarantee you're still in that coalition? Recently, new technologies that I don't need to name emerged, new things that could put you out of the loop. And maybe that it's just a matter of time for those new proto-resources to stress the system just a bit too much. After which this video hopefully gave you an idea of what happens.